Mira carried 7 pups across the frozen Vorn River in a single night, and by the time she reached the far bank, she could no longer feel her hands. She knew this because she looked at them, looked at her fingers curled around the rope harness she had knotted herself from strips of her own cloak, and the fingers did not respond when she told them to tighten. They held the harness anyway, locked in a grip that had become structural rather than voluntary. Her tendons having made the decision, her nerves could no longer execute. The pups were lashed against her chest and back in 2 bundles, 3 on her front and 4 across her shoulders, wrapped in every dry layer she had been able to salvage before the hunters closed on the den. They were still. She had given them the sleeping draught an hour before crossing, meadowsweet and valerian, measured in a cracked wooden spoon by the last light of the den's dying fire. And she had done it precisely so they would not cry, would not move, would not shift their weight at the wrong moment and pull her under. The river had been quiet in the way dangerous things are quiet. No crashing, no visible current, just a black seam at the center, where the ice had not closed, 20 feet across, and the knowledge that the water beneath it was moving fast enough to carry a body to the falls, 3 miles south, before anyone above the surface understood what had happened. She had not looked at the black seam while she crossed. She had looked at the far bank. That was 40 minutes ago, or perhaps an hour. The cold had compressed time into something she could no longer measure with any confidence, and what she knew for certain was only this: she was still moving north, the pups were still breathing. She checked by pressing her jaw to the nearest small body every few minutes, feeling the faint rise, and the hunters had not yet appeared on the south bank behind her. She could not hear pursuit. She could not hear much of anything now except the wind and the sound her boots made on the snow, a soft, repeated compression, like something being slowly crushed. Her name was Mira. She was 23 years old and ranked Omega in the Ashvale pack, which meant she was ranked last, which meant that when the Vorn Valley hunters had struck the winter den 7 days ago, no one had sent anyone to warn her. She had found out from the smoke. That was the cold open's central fact, and it was enough. She did not allow herself more than facts while she was moving, because anything beyond facts, anything that touched the den, the pack members she had last seen running south toward the hunter lines, the question of who among them was still alive, would stop her feet. She had learned this about herself 3 years ago, during the flood that took the eastern pup's den, when she had stood in the current for 4 seconds too long, trying to calculate who she could reach and who she could not. And in those 4 seconds, a pup had gone under before she could move. She had reached it. It had lived. But she had not forgotten the 4 seconds, and she had not made the same mistake again. So, facts: 7 pups sleeping against her body, 1 frozen river behind her, the Ashvale border stone, a granite pillar carved with the pack's mark, still somewhere ahead in the dark, perhaps 2 miles, perhaps 3. And to the north of that stone, if the old compact still held, the edge of Crown territory, the lands held by the pack of Ronan of the Ironwood, called the Alpha King of the Northern Reaches, whose name Mira had heard spoken in the same breath as winter and iron and the particular mercy that has no softness in it. She had never seen him. She had never expected to. She put 1 foot in front of the other, and the snow compressed beneath her, and she kept going. That was how things stood when her left knee buckled for the first time. She caught herself on a birch trunk, pressed her forehead to the bark, and breathed for 10 seconds with her eyes closed. The pups on her back shifted in their sleep, a small collective settling, and she waited until they were still again, before she straightened. Her knee held. She kept moving. She did not count her remaining steps toward the border stone, because counting was a form of hope, and hope, at this particular moment, cost energy she did not have to spend. She had been moving for 7 hours. She had not eaten since the morning before. The temperature, by her best guess from the quality of the cold on her exposed face, was somewhere below the point where exhaled breath stopped producing visible vapor and started producing a faint crackling sound near the lips. It was producing that sound now. She kept walking. 4 hours before Mira's knee first buckled against the birch, she had still been in the den. To understand how she arrived at the frozen river, with 7 pups roped to her body, it was necessary to understand 3 things about Mira, and the first was that she had been managing the Ashvale winter pups' care since she was 19 years old, not because she had been assigned the role by the pack elders, but because she had simply begun doing it, and no one had stopped her. She had no formal status in the pack beyond her rank, which was the lowest possible, which meant in practical terms that the elders ignored her recommendations, the warriors didn't carry her messages, and the pack's 3 senior healer women had at various points over the past 4 years told her, in descending tones of politeness, that her presence in the healing room was neither required nor particularly welcome. The first of them had said it gently. The work was already managed, thank you, she need not trouble herself. The second had said it flatly, rank determined function, and her function was labor, not care. The third had said it in front of 7 other pack members during the autumn assembly, and she had said it using a word for Omega that Mira had heard before, but which had not, until that moment, been applied to her face. Mira had said nothing to any of them. This was the second thing it was necessary to understand about her. She did not argue, not because she lacked the words or the clarity of thought to form them, but because she had calculated, with the same precise instrumentalism she applied to everything, that argument cost time and yielded nothing, whereas action was cheap, and its results were visible. She had a gift, if a practical skill acquired through obsessive reading and 4 years of quiet trial could be called a gift, for remedies, specifically for the management of the cold season fevers that killed Ashvale pups in their first 2 winters, at a rate the pack's senior healers had long accepted as simply the way of things. She had stopped accepting it at 19, when a pup in her ward had died of a fever she recognized, from a text she had copied by hand from the traveling healer's reference book, as treatable. She had gone back to that text and spent 3 months cross-referencing it against the valley's available herbs and finding substitutions for the ones the valley didn't have, and the winter she turned 20, she had begun quietly adding her preparations to the warming broths already being given in the pups' ward, and the death rate had dropped by half, and no one had asked why. This was the third thing. She was not invisible because she was unexceptional. She was invisible because the structure of the Ashvale pack had no category for an Omega, who was also the most competent person in the room, and so it had handled the contradiction by simply declining to see her. She had managed 7 pups through the current winter already, 4 from Ashvale's own breeding pairs, and 3 that had come to the valley with a small refugee group from the collapsed Stonemarsh pack, orphaned in a raid the previous summer. They ranged in age from 6 months to 2 years and 3 months. The 6-month-old, the one she called Finn in her own mind, though his dam had given him a proper name she kept forgetting, was the one who concerned her most. He had been thin at the start of the cold season and had fought 2 fevers back-to-back in the first month of winter, and he had come through them, but he had come through them smaller than he had gone in, and he tired faster than the others, and she watched him more than the rest. She had been watching him the morning the smoke appeared on the southern ridge. She had been in the pup's den, a low stone structure dug half into the hillside and lined with dry birch bark and wool, warm with the heat of 7 small bodies and the single iron brazier she kept burning through the night, and she had gone to the door to judge the morning light, and there it was, not the grey morning smoke of cook fires, the thick black roll of a structure burning, and under it the sound, distant but arriving, of shouting that had a quality to it that she recognized from the eastern flood, the register of adults running away from something rather than toward it. She did not freeze this time. 4 seconds had taught her enough. She went back inside and began preparing the sleeping draught. It took her 12 minutes to brew it, 10 minutes for it to take effect in all 7 pups, and 11 minutes to construct the harness from her own cloak, and the 2 supply cords she kept hanging by the door for exactly this category of emergency. She had prepared for this, not for hunters specifically, but for the general class of events that required rapid, silent movement with multiple small lives in her charge. She had sewn the harness design herself last autumn, working from a sketch in a text about mountain rescue, and she had tested it twice with sacks of grain, and once with 2 of the older pups during a calm afternoon, to their considerable amusement. It was ungainly, and it would hurt her shoulders and back. It would hold. She had the pups loaded, and the den door closed behind her in 34 minutes from the moment she first saw the smoke. There was no one in the pack common to stop her or help her. The southern courtyard was empty, except for 2 abandoned supply bags and a dropped torch burning itself out in the snow. She had taken the supply bags. One held dried meat and wrapped grain cakes. The other held a water flask and a coil of rope. She had taken all of it. Then she had turned north and begun walking, because north was the only direction the hunters would not expect an Omega to go, which meant north was the direction that offered the longest interval before discovery, which meant north was where the pups had the best odds. She had not thought about the Vorn River until she arrived at it in the dark, and when she arrived, she had stood on the south bank for 2 minutes, assessing the ice. The thickness she could judge by color in the moonlight, and by the sound it made when she pressed her heel to it, and then she had started across. She had crossed in 14 minutes. The ice had held, and now she was here, on the north bank, moving through birch forest in the dark, with the border stone somewhere ahead, and her left knee starting to report a deep, grinding ache that told her the joint was beginning to fail under the weight and the cold. She knew this ache. It was the same knee she had torn at 17, catching herself on a route during the flood summer, and it had never been quite right since. The cold made it worse. The cold made everything worse, except the sleeping draught, which had an indiscriminate effectiveness she occasionally envied. She found herself thinking, as she walked, about heat, not warmth in any metaphoric sense, but literal heat. The iron brazier in the pup's den, the weight of it, the sound the coals made when she turned them at midnight, the particular smell of hot iron and birch smoke that had been the atmosphere of her working life for 4 years. She thought about it with the precise, detailed concentration of someone who knows they cannot have a thing and finds that a thorough examination of the thing is almost as good as having it. Almost. Finn was the lightest of the pups, but his weight, distributed across her chest, pressed against her sternum with every step, and she found she was glad of it. As long as she could feel him pressing, she knew he was there. She could feel very little else in the front of her body now. Her feet, inside their wool wraps and leather boots, were the next thing going, she suspected, not the feet themselves, which were still generating some warmth through movement, but the toes, particularly on the left foot, where the boot lacing had come partially loose at the river crossing, and she had not stopped to recknot it. She should stop and rig-knot it. She did not stop. Stopping, at the temperature the air had become, was a different kind of risk than loose laces. She kept walking. The birch forest was quiet. The moon, 3 days past full, sat low and cold above the tree line ahead of her, casting the kind of light that showed everything in blue-white and hid nothing, and in that light she could see the ground rising gently ahead, which meant she was climbing toward the ridge, where, according to the pack geography she had memorized from an old Ashvale boundary map, the border stone stood. 1 mile, perhaps less. She put her head down and walked. By the time the smoke from the Vorn Valley had reached the hunting party Ronan had sent to the eastern ridge, the fire had been burning for 3 hours. This was information Ronan received in the great hall of Ironwood Keep while he was reviewing the winter tithe records, and he received it with the stillness that was his primary administrative affect, a setting down of the wax tablet, a pause that lasted 4 seconds, and then a series of questions asked in the flat, precise register that his counsel had learned to read, as urgency wearing the clothing of calm. How many structures, which pack's territory, confirmed or suspected hunter activity. He was 31 years old and had held the title of Alpha King of the Northern Reaches for 7 years, having taken it from his father at 24, under circumstances the council still referred to as the succession, and Ronan referred to as nothing, because he did not discuss it. He was not a large man in the way some alphas used size as their primary argument. He was broad, yes, and the kind of lean that comes from sustained physical work, rather than ornament. And the pack's wolves nearest to him in rank occasionally had the experience of standing in his proximity and finding their own instincts quieter than usual, as though something in the air near him solved a question they hadn't realized they were asking. He had never understood this entirely. He only knew his wolf was old and settled and did not require the performances other alphas seemed to find necessary. He dispatched 6 warriors to the Vorn Valley Ridge to assess and report. He did not go himself, because his presence on an Ashvale boundary would be read as territorial provocation, and the information he had was not yet sufficient to justify that reading. He would wait for the report. He waited 2 hours. The report, when it came, was partial. The Ashvale den was burned. Some pack members scattered south toward the Thornwall. Hunters retreated into the forests east of the valley. No confirmed dead. No confirmed survivor count. His warrior, a woman named Kala, with an unusually good nose, and the particular ironwood gift for tracking across long distances, added one further detail before she left the hall. She had caught a scent thread on the north wind that she couldn't account for, something carrying south from the ironwood forest. Small lives, she said, and something else she couldn't name. She had followed it to the border stone, and then pulled back because it was Crown territory, and she had not had orders to cross. Ronan had been still for a moment after she left. His wolf knew before he did. He felt it as a pull in the chest, not the manufactured urgency of duty, but something older and less argumentative, the way the body moves toward warmth without being instructed. He dismissed it as concern for the pups whose scent Kala had identified. He was a practical man, and he dealt in what was actionable. He told himself this as he took his cloak from the door peg. He told himself this as he crossed the great hall and went out into the cold. He was moving north before he had fully formed the decision to move, and he understood, with the resignation of a man who had managed his wolf's agenda for 31 years, that this was one of those moments when the wolf and the man had reached the same conclusion by different routes, and there was nothing to be gained by pretending otherwise. The wind was from the north. He stopped at the tree line and breathed it in. There, under the cold and the birch sap and the thin ice smell of the Vorn, something sweet and exhausted, and underneath it, dimly, the scent of something that should not have been out in this cold, several small bodies in the particular biochemical state of medicated sleep, and behind all of it, quieter than anything, a trace of pain that had been going on long enough to stop broadcasting and start seeping. His wolf did not announce itself. It simply went still in the way it went still when something important was very close, and in the stillness, Ronan heard his own pulse in his ears, for the first time in as long as he could remember. He kept walking. He was moving faster than he had intended. He found her 40 minutes later, less than a quarter-mile north of the border stone. She was still moving. He registered this before anything else. The fact of her still moving, still putting one foot in front of the other, through snow that was now above her knees, because the wind had drifted it against the ridge, with 7 pups roped to her body, in a harness that had been, he saw, ingeniously constructed, and was now failing at the left shoulder, where the rope had frayed against something sharp. She had not stopped to address this. Perhaps she hadn't felt it. He could see from 30 yards that her hands were not responding the way hands should, that her gait had the particular forward-falling quality of a body that was using momentum rather than muscular control to keep itself upright, and that she was not going to reach the ironwood without going down. He said nothing for the first 5 seconds after he saw her, because he needed those 5 seconds to manage his wolf, which had gone from stillness to a tension that expressed itself in his hands as a closing of the fingers on nothing, and in his chest as something that was not quite pain, but was adjacent to it. He had never felt this before. He had been near distress before, had managed it, had made decisions in proximity to it. This was different. This had a directional quality, as though the pain he was scenting was pulling at him rather than simply registering. He kept the 5 seconds and then he moved. His wolf said one word. He pressed it down. Mira. He said her name without knowing her name. She stopped. She turned. In the blue-white moonlight he saw her face for the first time, not young-looking, though she was young, but worn in the way things are worn that have been used continuously and carefully and hard. And he saw her eyes, which were dark and steady, and did not show fear when she registered him, which was not what he expected. He had expected fear. He had spent 7 years arriving in emergency situations and being met with fear, which was the appropriate response to an alpha king moving fast in a dark forest. She was looking at him the way someone looks at a problem they are in the process of solving, assessing, categorizing, deciding. "Are you Ronan's people?" she said. Her voice was even, which was remarkable given what her body was communicating to the air around her. Even and low, and already moving past the question toward whatever answer she had decided to give. "I am Ronan," he said. Something crossed her face that was not, precisely, relief. It was closer to the expression of a person who has carried a load to a specific destination and found the destination to be real, a settling, a calculation completed. Then her left knee gave way, and the pups came with her, and he was already moving before she began to fall. He caught her with both arms, caught the weight of her and the 7 pups together, and the smell of her hit him fully at that proximity, sweet and sour together, the exhaustion like damp earth, the pain like cold copper, and beneath it all, something that his wolf recognized before his mind assembled any words for it, something that made the marrow of his hands go warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature or effort. He said nothing. He held her, and she let him hold her, which was the most telling thing she had done so far, because everything else about her said this was a woman who did not let people hold her, who had not let anyone hold her in a long time. The pups, undisturbed in their medicinal sleep, breathed slow and steady against them both. "7," she said into his shoulder, in a voice that was finally, at last, working to hold itself together. "There are 7. The youngest is 6 months. He's been feverish." "I can smell it," he said. "He's alive. They're all alive." She didn't answer. He felt the weight in his arms change slightly, not unconsciousness, not yet, but the particular softening of a body that has finished doing the thing it was doing and has not yet located the next thing. He tightened his hold. He was not going to put her down. "How long?" he said. 7 hours moving, 7 days since the hunters came. A pause. "I didn't have anywhere else to go but north." "North," he said, "is correct." He called his wolf, which surfaced easily and willingly in a way that meant the wolf already considered this its territory and its concern, and in its larger form he could carry her and the pups together without difficulty. He did not shift entirely, only enough. He carried her the rest of the way to Ironwood Keep in the dark, and she did not speak again until they were inside and warm, and when she did, it was to ask about Finn. He did not know then what that would mean, her asking about the pup before she asked about herself, before she asked about food or heat, or any of the things her body was urgently requiring. He would think about it later. He would think about it in the days after, when he was reconstructing her in his mind, the way you reconstruct a text you've read once and need to understand fully. She had crossed a frozen river with 7 pups roped to her body, and she had not cried, and she had not stopped, and the first words she had used her recovered voice for were about someone else's welfare. He thought about this. He thought about it for a long time. The healer women of Ironwood cut the harness away and attended to Mira's hands, which had severe cold damage in all 10 fingers, worse on the left. They would heal, the senior healer told Ronan. Full recovery in both hands was likely. He received this with his face, doing what his face did in the council hall, which was very little, and then he went to stand in the corridor, outside the healing room, and stayed there until there was nothing more to be done for the night. Inside the room, through the closed door, he could smell her. He could also smell the 7 pups, 4 of them now transferred to the Ironwood Pups ward, where the night nurses were dealing with the tail end of the sleeping draft with practiced briskness. The 3 who remained in the healing room, the smallest ones, including Finn, were awake now and increasingly vocal about it, and he could hear the healer women managing them, with the resigned efficiency of people who have experience with this, and under all of it, he could hear Mira's voice, low and even, talking the 6-month-old through whatever was frightening him, with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Ronan stood in the corridor and listened to this and did not go in. His wolf was not quiet. His wolf had not been quiet since the forest, and what it wanted was very clear and very old and very simple and could not be acted on, because she was injured and barely conscious, and he had met her 40 minutes ago, and he was not the kind of man who confused what his wolf wanted with what was right. So he stood in the corridor, he breathed, he waited. In the morning, when the healer women had gone and the pups were sleeping, and Mira was lying in the bed with her hands bandaged and her eyes open, staring at the ceiling in the way people stare at ceilings when they are cataloguing the dead and trying to be honest about the count, he knocked on the doorframe. She looked at him. The assessment was still there, the same quality of attention she had given him in the forest. He found he did not mind being assessed. He found, actually, that he preferred it to the careful performance most people gave him when he was in a room with them. Finn's fever broke in the night, he said. The healer said the preparation in his system was good work. She wanted to know who made it. Something happened in Mira's face, small and fast, and she controlled it immediately, but he saw it. I made it, she said. I can write it out for her if she wants it. She does, Ronan said. He paused. Your pack left you to manage 7 pups alone. It was not a question. She heard that it wasn't. My pack left to survive, she said. That's different. Is it? She was quiet for a moment. Then no, not entirely. She looked at the ceiling again, then back at him. How long can the pups stay here? As long as necessary? That's not an answer. No, he said. It isn't. He looked at her, in the way he had been trying not to look at her since the forest, which was with the full attention of both the man and the wolf, which was a more complete kind of looking than he usually allowed himself, and he said, How long can you stay here? She understood what he was asking. He saw her understand it, saw the careful recalibration behind her eyes, the reconstruction of a situation she had been mapping one way, suddenly presenting itself in different coordinates. She did not look away. He gave her credit for that without saying so. I don't know what I am to you, she said. Practical, precise, not fearful. I know what you are. I've heard you described. You're accurate to the description, mostly. But I don't know the rest. I know what you are, he said. He said it carefully, because it was the truest thing he had said in years, and he was not going to waste it. I knew in the forest. My wolf knew at the border stone. He paused. I'm telling you this because you've already demonstrated you deal better with the truth than with managed information. She looked at him for a long time. Outside the window, the ironwood was white and still, and the morning light was the pale gold of winter giving way by degrees. I crossed a frozen river, she said finally. I can't feel my hands. I know. You're telling me I'm your mate. Yes. And the pups are welcome here for as long as any of them need to be. He paused again. as are you, regardless of anything else. Regardless, she said, as though she was testing the weight of the word. You should rest, he said. We can speak again when you've slept. She nodded once, which was not agreement so much as acknowledgement. He took it as what it was. He left her to sleep. He went to his council hall and sat through the morning's business with considerably less of his attention than he usually gave it, which his council noticed, but had the collective wisdom not to remark on. The Ashvale elders sent a formal message 3 days after Mira arrived at Ironwood Keep. The message requested, in the particular formal language of pack politics that had been developed over generations, precisely because it allowed people to say threatening things without technically saying threatening things, the return of both the 7 pups and the Omega who had, as the message phrased it, taken them without sanction. Ronan read the message once. He set it on the table in front of him. He looked at it for a moment, with the stillness that his counsel read, as urgency wearing the clothing of calm. Then he wrote the response himself, which was unusual. He generally delegated correspondence. He wrote it in the formal register, which was also unusual. He wrote 3 sentences. The first confirmed receipt of the Ashvale message. The second stated that the 7 pups and the female named Mira were under the protection of the Ironwood Crown, as per the standing compact governing the shelter of any pack members who crossed the northern boundary in distress. The third sentence was the one that would travel fastest through the territorial gossip of the northern reaches, the one that would take less than a week to reach every pack elder from the Vorn Valley to the Stonemarsh coast. He worded it carefully. He worded it the way you word a thing you intend to be permanent. He told them Mira was his mate and claimed under Ironwood law. He sent the message, and then he went to the healing room, because it was the 4th day, and her hands were healing well, and she was increasingly unlikely to remain in the bed for much longer, and he had something to say that he preferred she hear from him before she heard it from anyone else. She was not in the bed when he arrived. She was standing at the window with her bandaged hands held carefully in front of her, looking out at the Ironwood courtyard, where 3 of the older pups were running in the snow under the supervision of an Ironwood nurse, and making the particular sounds that pups make when they have discovered that snow, thrown with sufficient force, produces a satisfying impact. Finn was not yet well enough to be outside, but through the door she had propped open between the healing room and the pups' ward, she could see him in his cot, awake and watching the window with the focused attention of someone building the case for being allowed outside. She turned when Ronan came in. She read his face. "You've already told them," she said. "Yes." "Did you tell me this was coming?" "I'm telling you now." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You could have asked." "I could have asked," he agreed. "I should have. I'm sorry." She looked at him. He met her eyes. The apology sat in the room between them, real and unqualified, and he saw it register, saw her recalibrate again, her model of him updating against this new data point. He let her update. He did not try to manage her conclusion. "What does it mean?" she said. "Claimed under Ironwood law. What does that mean in practice?" "It means the Ashvale elders have no authority over you or the pups you were caring for. It means you are protected under the Crown Compact for as long as you choose to remain. It means you can negotiate any of the rest as you need to." He paused. "The bond claim is real. That is not negotiable. Not because I've made it so, but because it was true in the forest, before either of us had words for it. Everything else is a conversation we can have." She turned back to the window. In the courtyard, the snow throwing had escalated into a full engagement, and the nurse had apparently decided she was the neutral party in this conflict, and was standing to one side with the expression of someone who has chosen peace. Finn, at the propped door, had pulled himself up to sitting. "He's going to want out there by tomorrow," Mira said. "Probably," Ronan said. "He needs another 3 days inside minimum. His lungs aren't clear." I'll tell the nurses." She was quiet for a while longer. The morning light moved on the snow outside. Then she said, without turning, "I spent 4 years being the person no one sent for when something needed doing, and no one thanked when it got done anyway." He said nothing. This required no answer. "I don't know what the other version looks like," she said. "The version where the work gets seen." "You'll learn it," Ronan said. "I'll be there while you do." She turned then and looked at him, and the assessment was still there, but there was something else alongside it now, something less guarded, something that might, with more sleep and more time, and more of the quiet, ordinary days that she had never been given, become something he didn't have a clinical word for. He was patient. He had time. He was going to use all of it. The 6 remaining pups were formally assigned to Ironwood's pack foster care in the 3rd week of Mira's recovery, with the agreement of every surviving Ashvale breeding pair who could be reached, and the 3 Stonemarsh orphans by the Standing Crown Authority over unparented young. The Ashvale elders sent a second message. Ronan declined to read it personally and had Calla summarize it, which Calla did in 12 words: angry, formal, no legal grounds. He thanked her and returned to what he had been doing, which was sitting with Mira in the healing room while she showed the senior healer her fever preparation, formula by formula, using the healer's written notation because her hands were not yet reliable enough for writing, and she was dictating with the calm precision of someone who has been waiting a long time to be asked. He watched her explain the preparation and saw the healer's face change as she understood what she was being given, saw the particular expression of a skilled person encountering another skilled person's work and recognizing it as better than expected. And he saw Mira see it, and he saw Mira's face do something small and contained and complicated that she probably thought he wasn't watching closely enough to catch. He was watching. He was going to keep watching. He was a long way from done. The mating bite happened in the 5th week, when her hands were fully recovered and the worst of winter had crested and begun its slow withdrawal. There was no ceremony to it. It happened in the quiet of the evening, in the room they had by then arrived at together, through the ordinary accumulation of days spent in proximity, and it was done with complete consent, and without any of the spectacle that Omega to Alpha King claiming was sometimes given in the old stories. No grand hall, no assembled witnesses, just the 2 of them, and the settling of something that had been unresettled since the forest, and afterward the mark on her throat that pulsed warm when he was near, and that the Ironwood wolves, when they passed her in the corridors after that day, would register in the way wolves register things that have become true, with a half-step of deference, an averted gaze, the particular biological courtesy given to the mate of a king. She noticed the deference before she understood it. She stopped Calla in the corridor one morning and asked her, directly, what was happening. Calla looked at her with the expression of someone who finds a question obvious, but is not going to say so, and she said, "They're acknowledging your rank. That's all. They knew before the mark. They knew in the 1st week." Mira was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Nobody told me." Calla looked at her a while longer, and then said, with absolute seriousness, "Nobody needed to tell you. The rank doesn't come from being told. It comes from being what you are." And she kept walking. Mira stood in the corridor for a moment after that. Then she went to the pups ward, because Finn was due for his midday examination, and because the oldest of the 7, the 2-year 3-month girl, they were now calling Senna, had developed a cough that Mira wanted to check before it established itself, and because the work was there, and it was good work, and it was hers. Ronan found her there an hour later, crouched between 2 small cots, speaking to Senna about the cough in the level and specific way she spoke to all of them, the way that assumed intelligence and gave it something to work with. He stood in the doorway. His wolf was as quiet as it had ever been in his life. He watched her tuck the blanket up around Senna's shoulders with her healed hands, both of them, easy and careful and completely sufficient, and thought about a woman who had crossed a frozen river in the dark, with 7 pups roped to her body, and arrived at the far bank still moving, and understood for perhaps the first time the full magnitude of what he had been given by accident of a north wind and a warrior with a good nose. The autumn after, when the birch trees had turned gold above Ironwood Keep, and the first thin chill was coming back into the mornings, Senna learned to write her own name, using a carved wooden stylus Ronan had made for her, from a birch branch over the course of several evenings in the council hall, when the day's business was done. The stylus was slightly crooked, and the handle had been sanded smooth in the particular places small hands would hold it, and Senna used it to scratch her name in wax, and then showed it, with the complete and uncomplicated satisfaction of someone who has accomplished something real, to Mira. Mira looked at the name, looked at the stylus, looked up at Ronan across the room, who was watching this with the careful stillness of a man who has learned that some things are best received without comment. She said nothing. She smiled. It was a small thing, fully meant, and it was enough. Finn, who had been watching this exchange from his place on the floor, where he was arranging small stones into a pattern only he understood, looked up at the two of them, and then back at his stones, with the serene incuriosity of a child who has grown up in a house where the adults look at each other like that, and considers it simply the way of things. He was 1 year and 2 months old now, and he was no longer thin. This was the fact that mattered most to Mira when she allowed herself to think about it, and she thought about it often in the way she thought about precise things, with attention, without sentiment, with the particular satisfaction of a measurement taken and found to be correct. He had gained weight through the summer in the slow, steady way of a constitution that was fundamentally sound and had simply needed time and consistency and the right food in reliable quantities. He could walk now, a determined, slightly top-heavy walk that occasionally resulted in a sitting down that surprised him more than it should have, given how frequently it occurred. And he was building the vocabulary of a person who has discovered that words are available and intends to use all of them as rapidly as possible. His dam, one of the surviving Ashvale women who had found her way north in the 2nd month after the hunters, had settled in Ironwood as part of the small Ashvale remnant that Ronan had formerly extended sanctuary to in the winter's aftermath. She came to the pups ward every morning. She always greeted Mira first. This was a thing Mira had not expected and did not entirely know what to do with, and so she did what she did with most things she did not know how to manage. She proceeded with her work and allowed the other thing to exist alongside it without demanding that she resolve it. The Ashvale elders had sent no further messages after the 3rd. Ronan had received word in the spring that the remnant pack had reconsolidated under a new elder council and was negotiating shelter with one of the southern packs, and he had conveyed this to Mira as information she was entitled to have. She had listened and then asked whether any of the information touched the status of the 7 pups in Ironwood's care. He had told her it did not. She had nodded and returned to what she was doing. What she was doing, increasingly, was more than fever preparations and pup management, though she continued to do both with the same complete focus she had always given them. The senior healer, whose name was Davin, and who had in the first week of Mira's recovery treated her with the polite distance of someone reserving judgment, had by the 3rd month dropped the distance entirely, and by the 6th month was sending her written questions through the Ironwood messenger system, as though this were a long-established professional correspondence, and not something that had begun with a dictated fever formula, and grown by accretion into something neither of them had named. Mira answered the questions. She asked her own. She had begun, over the winter, to compile a written text from the various sources she had accumulated over years of reading, the copied pages, the margins of borrowed reference books, the careful notations she had made in her own hand on scraps of birch bark that had traveled north in the inner pocket of her cloak, when everything else was left behind. Ronan had given her a room for this work, not a healer's workroom. Those were Davin's territory, and Mira had no interest in displacing them, but a small room on the east side of the keep, with 2 good north-facing windows, and a long table, and shelves that he had had built to her specified dimensions, on the basis of a sketch she had made on the back of a council notice. She had looked at the room when it was finished, and said nothing for a long moment, and then she had said, with the precision she applied to everything, "The top shelf needs to come down 3 inches. I can't reach it without a stool." He had had it adjusted. She had said thank you. He had said it was not a significant thing. She had given him the look that told him she knew exactly what category of significant thing it was, and was choosing not to argue about the classification, and they had both let it stand there between them as something understood. She was in that room on the morning the Pack Council met to formalize her status. This had been coming for several months. The mating mark was real and acknowledged, and biologically irrefutable, and the Ironwood wolves had been navigating around the gap between that biological fact and the absence of formal pack record for long enough that Calla had finally told Ronan, in the direct way she told him, things that other council members, dressed up in more diplomatic language, that the pack would benefit from the public acknowledgement, not because they doubted the bond, but because pack records existed for a reason, and an Alpha King's mate being unrecorded was an administrative situation that was going to generate complications if it wasn't addressed. Ronan had considered this, and agreed, and told her to set the council date. He had told Mira this was coming. He had told her precisely what it would involve, which was a formal session of the Pack Council, at which the record of the mating bond would be entered, and the rank designation formalized, and 3 witnesses would attest to the mark, which was a requirement of Ironwood Pack law for all bonds entered into by the Alpha, and was not specific to her or to the circumstances of her arrival. He had told her she did not need to do anything at the session except be present and answer 2 questions that he gave her in advance, so she could consider her answers without the pressure of the moment. She had listened to all of this and asked 3 clarifying questions about the procedural sequence, and then she had said, "All right," which from her meant what it had always meant: assessment completed, decision reached, proceeding. But the morning of, he had found her in the workroom before the session, standing at the long table with both hands flat on the surface and her eyes on the north windows, and the quality of her stillness was different from her working stillness. He had stood in the doorway for a moment. She was aware of him. She always was. The mark site at her throat pulsed when he was near, which she had told him once with the precision she brought to all physical reports, and he had noted it and not remarked further, because she had given him the information and not the sentiment, and he understood the distinction. "Tell me," he said. She did not turn immediately. Then she did. Her face had the look of someone who has been honest with themselves and is deciding whether to be honest out loud. "The last formal pack assembly I attended," she said, "the elder spoke a word at me, in front of 7 people, that I have not repeated and do not intend to repeat. That was the last one." He was quiet. The birch light through the north windows was the early autumn kind, pale and clear, and it sat on the table between them without doing anything in particular. "This is not that assembly," he said. "I know. The council knows what you carried across that river. Calla was there the night I brought you in. The healer has given her account. The nurses who cut the harness off you have been part of this pack's conversation for 9 months. I know that too." He waited. She said, "The word that elder used, it's still the category I occupy in the official Ashvale record, whatever record survived. The Ashvale record has no jurisdiction here," Ronan said. "It had no jurisdiction from the moment you crossed the border stone. I know that too." She looked at her hands on the table, healed, both of them, fully functional, which Davin had confirmed, and which Mira herself had tested systematically and with characteristic thoroughness. "I know all of it. I'm not arguing with any of it." She looked up at him. "I spent 4 years being told what I wasn't. It takes longer than 9 months to stop hearing it." He crossed the room. He stopped at the table's edge. He did not reach for her, because she was standing in a particular way that said she was managing herself and preferred to finish managing before being touched. "What the elders called you," he said, "is not what you are. It was not an accurate description when they said it, and it is less accurate now than it was then." He paused. "But more importantly, it was not earned by them. They used a word as though it was a verdict, and it was not their verdict to give. Your worth was not assigned to you by the Ashvale Council, and it cannot be taken from you by them." She was looking at him steadily. He held the eye contact. "What you are," he said, "is the person who crossed a frozen river in the dark, with 7 pups roped to her body, and arrived still moving. That is not a thing the Ashvale elders created, or can revoke. It is a thing you did. It belongs to you." The birchlight moved slightly as the morning advanced. Finn was somewhere in the keep. He could hear him distantly, the particular percussive investigation of a toddler who has found an interesting surface, and the sound was ordinary and domestic, and entirely right in a way that Ronan had stopped being surprised by, but had not stopped noticing. Mira was quiet for a moment, then she took her hands off the table and straightened, and the quality of her stillness shifted back to the working kind, the decisive kind, the kind that preceded action. "2 questions," she said, "and I've already worked out the answers." "Yes," he said. "All right." She looked at the north windows once more, at the pale autumn light on the birch trees, and whatever she was looking for, she either found it or decided she didn't need it. "Then let's go." The session was not long. Pack council formalities in the Ironwood tradition were built for precision over ceremony, and the questions were asked and answered, and the record was entered, and the 3 witnesses, Calla, Davin, and the senior nurse from the Pups ward, gave their attestations in the flat, factual register of people reporting things they consider self-evident. Ronan watched Mira receive the council's formal acknowledgement with the same expression she gave every important thing: steady, precise, not performing ease, but genuinely in possession of it, or near enough that the distance was closing. When the session ended, and the council had filed out, Calla paused at the door. She looked at Mira. Mira looked back. "The preparation you gave Davin," Calla said. "The fever one. She used it on 3 pups from the Stonemarsh group in late summer. All 3 recovered." Mira said nothing for a moment. Then, "I know. She told me." "I'm telling you again," Calla said, "because it should be said more than once." She held Mira's gaze a moment longer, then nodded once, the particular nod that among Ironwood warriors was as close to ceremony as they generally got, and she left. The door closed. Ronan did not say anything. Mira was looking at the door. He watched the line of her shoulders and the way she breathed, and knew she was doing the same thing she had done in the forest when she arrived at the far bank, assessing the ground under her, testing whether it would hold, finding that it would. She turned. She looked at him with the full directness she had given him since the beginning, since the forest, the quality of attention that had nothing managed or performed in it, that took him as he was and expected the same in return, and he had understood for a long time that this was one of the rarest things a person could be given, and he intended to behave accordingly for the rest of his life. "The pups need their midday," she said. "They do," he said. She moved toward the door, and he fell into step beside her, as they had fallen into step beside each other, in the months of daily work and daily proximity that had built what they had now, and the keep was warm around them, in the way of a place that has been lived in long enough to hold the warmth of its occupants. In the Pups ward, all 7 were present, and in varying states of the organized disorder that characterized midday in the ward. Senna was demonstrating her written name to the 2-year-old boy beside her, with the authority of someone who has information to impart and considers it her responsibility to impart it. The boy was listening with polite skepticism. The others were eating, sleeping, or in Finn's case, seated in the middle of the floor, engaged in the systematic examination of a wooden carved object that Ronan had made him over several evenings the previous week, a wolf no larger than a fist, sanded smooth and sized for small hands. Finn looked up when Mira came in. He held up the carved wolf. "Mira," he said. This was one of his reliable words. He used it with the same confidence he used the words for food and warm and outside. It was a word that designated something important and present and his. "I see it," Mira said. She crouched down to his level and looked at the carving with the serious attention she gave things he showed her. "What does it say?" Finn considered this question with the gravity it deserved. He held the wolf up closer to his face and appeared to listen. Then he reported, in a voice of great authority, "Warm." Mira looked at the carving for a moment. Then she looked up at Ronan, standing in the ward doorway, and the same small smile was there that had been there when Senna showed her the stylus, fully meant, nothing performed in it, the real thing, which was worth more than anything larger. "Warm," she said, as though confirming a measurement. "Warm," Ronan agreed. Outside, the birch trees had gone fully gold in the morning light, and the season was turning, and the keep was full of the sounds of ordinary days, small voices, the smell of the midday broth coming from the kitchen 2 corridors over, the particular creak of the East Wing's floorboards that Mira had catalogued in her first week and could now navigate in the dark. 7 pups, alive and known and accounted for. 2 hands, healed and useful. A long table in a room with north-facing windows, and work that mattered, and a pack that registered her rank in the corridor before they said a word. She had carried them across the river. She had arrived, still moving. Everything after that was hers.